We have a very exciting guest for you today, Blake Brewer. At 19 years old, Blake Brewer was faced with an unimaginable tragedy when his father tragically drowned in Hawaii while they were snorkeling together.
Just me and my dad standing on the beach. We're about to go snorkeling. And he looks down at me with this big smile. And he said, "Man, I'm glad you're out here with me." And we put on the snorkel gear and headed out in the water. And pretty soon we got to a pretty deep spot. And the current was really strong. And my dad started to struggle.
Blake was able to swim his father, Larry Brewer, to shore, but after CPR attempts to save his life were unsuccessful, he was pronounced dead, leaving Blake in a state of shock.
I'm back in the condo, and my mom appeared in the doorway. And she said, "I found something in your dad's briefcase that I know he was going to give you on this trip."
It was a letter from his dad that he'd been working on for months.
My wife's sitting there looking at me like,
She had no idea it was
wait,
coming.
like you're gonna, I know your letter was important, but you're telling me that you're gonna help people write a letter, and you're gonna provide, he's looking at our three kids, like provide for us by doing that. My dad, to tell you a little bit about him, he was a hospital administrator, but before I was born, he was more known as a football player. And so, like your son, my dad was a tight end, and so he was drafted by the Atlanta Falcons. But his main claim to fame is he was Terry Bradshaw's tight end at Virginia Tech, and so they were best friends and roommates. And you can imagine some of the stories that came out of those years. And I actually got to talk to Bradshaw, did an interview with him a couple months ago, and he's talking about his fatherhood journey, but he told some stories about me and about my dad and him. It was pretty fun. And so, I will say this too: my dad was very humble, and he hardly ever told anyone that he was Terry Bradshaw's tight end. On the flip side, I told everybody. it was like my claim to fame growing up. And so, yeah, we're out there in the water, and we just kept going further and further out. And there was a moment where I didn't see my dad anymore, and I panicked. I was like, man, where'd my dad go? And I'm scanning the water looking for him. Where's my dad? Where's my dad? And then all of a sudden I saw him. And I initially thought, okay, good, there's my dad. And but then quickly I realized, man, not good, because my dad was struggling. And he looked right at me and started yelling for help. And he had this really big, deep, booming voice, but this yell for help was more like this like soft whimper. And so I swam to him as quickly as I could. By the time I reached him, he was underneath the water, and he was unconscious, and he was just, kind of floating there. And I dove down, and I wrapped my arms around him. I brought him back up to the surface, and I began to swim with him to the shore. And to be honest, I got to a point where I don't think I was going to make it anymore, and I was just exhausted. And a nearby snorkeler showed up and helped me get my dad to shore. And then the lifeguards saw what was happening, and they came over and they started doing CPR to my dad. And I did the only thing I knew to do. As they were doing CPR, I stood next to them and just started crying out to God. God, would you please save my dad's life? And to be honest, I really thought that at any point he was going to come to, like you see in the movies, like God is going to flicker open, the water's going to come out of his mouth. But it never happened until my dad drowned. And it went from one of the best moments, the best days of my life, to the worst in just a matter of moments. And I'm sitting there next to my dad's body, like, what the heck just happened? Like we were literally just having the time of our life, and now my dad is gone forever. And so I was already starting to ask myself some questions, like, how are we as a family about to make it without my dad? How am I going to make it? And so fast forward a couple hours, now we're back in the condo, and I'm sitting in the back bedroom on the edge of the bed, just by myself. I'm still just in total shock, devastated. And my mom appears in the doorway, and she says, "Blake, I found something in your dad's briefcase, something that I know he was going to give you on this trip." And I had no idea what she was talking about, but she walked across the room and she handed me a letter from my dad. And it was everything I needed in that moment. I started reading this letter, and it was as if my dad was still there, like I could hear his voice as I was reading this letter. And the words that he wrote comforted me. There was a sense of peace and it came over me, and I felt hope. And then I just felt so loved. Like, don't tell me my dad didn't love me. My dad took the time to put down on paper how he felt about us and share some wisdom and some advice. And then I got to the last line of this letter, and my dad was a man of faith. And he wrote, I only believe God could have allowed him to write this, but he said, as you're being faithful to the Bible, you're often going to find yourself in the minority here on earth. But I assure you that in heaven, you'll be in the majority. Love your dear old dad. And so I remember reading that thinking, man, I am going to see my dad. And so I cannot imagine my life without this letter. I think about even the days and the weeks and the months after that as I was grieving, and almost every night I was crying myself to sleep, just thinking about how much I missed dad, but I missed my dad, but also reliving that day and ask, like, is there something I could have done? Like, could I have saved my dad if I swam differently? And anytime, like, was this my fault? And anytime I even started to have that thought, it was like my dad's voice was right there, like, this wasn't his fault, it's just an accident. And my dad protected me from having survivor's guilt. Like, I never experienced survivor's guilt. And at the end of the 12 months, I had some professional counselors tell me, Blake, you grieved this really well in a healthy way compared to most people. And I can only attribute that to my dad's letter. And even during that 12 months, like I think of all the pain that I was experiencing and the things I could have run to try to numb out that pain, or the drugs, alcohol, girls, whatever it was. And I didn't do any of that stuff. I know myself. I could have easily done that. And I didn't. I grew more in my leadership, more in my relationship with God, more relationship with my family than any other 12 month stretch of my life. And I attribute that to my dad's letter.
What a moving story. And I'm just curious, did your mom, was she aware that he was working on this letter at the time, or she just randomly found this letter?
She told me that she knew he was working on something. But are you guys there? Oh yeah, all right. So you disappeared on my screen.
Yeah, he's just gonna do this.
Okay. Yeah, my mom, she told me that she knew about kind of that he was working on something, but she hadn't read it, and she didn't really know the plan and wanted to give it to me or anything like that.
So is this out of character for your dad to be sharing this kind of material and thoughts and feelings with you? I don't know, maybe your mom knows, was he encouraged to write this, or why do you feel that he all of a sudden started working on this letter?
Man, I would love to know. My dad had never written a letter like that before. My dad was a very much like an introverted person. I knew that my dad loved me. He wasn't like a huge touchy-feely guy. And at the same time, when I'm reading this letter, I wasn't just shocked that the things he wrote, and I wasn't shocked that he wrote us a letter, but it wasn't something that he did ordinarily.
Did you have a sense, Blake, that maybe like your dad knew something, like there was some premonition that like I need to do this, I'm not going to be here that long, or it was just fate that day?
It's hard to say. He didn't write it as if he was about to die. My dad did not in any way think that he was about to die.
Yeah. How old was your dad when he drowned?
He was 54.
Wow, so he's a really young guy.
So
yeah.
So, but who knows? I don't know exactly what was going through his mind. Like, I don't know. I was 19. I was moved out of the house for the first time, and so there could have been a lot of those thoughts going on. Like he wanted to. I needed that letter, to be honest. I was starting to get off track a little bit in life.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, you mentioned that you were crying out to God, asking him to save your dad there on the beach. And then, I can relate to these thoughts of, I know we had a lot of that, Kelly. There was the story in the ravine with Carolyn and Mitch, and what could they have done? Maybe we felt like maybe we missed something, and you were having those same types of feelings, in terms of could I have saved him? Can you talk more about that? I mean, did that immediately come into your mind, like I should have been able to get him to the shore quicker, or I should have been able to do something? What were you struggling with in your mind?
Immediately, I was not. To be honest, I was just so shocked. Like this, we're over there in Hawaii, and you might as well be in a different country. Like we're so far away from home, and then as the oldest son, now I'm like having to call back. Like my mom was in really no condition to do that, so I'm calling like church, our friends, and having to. And then, but in the coming days and months, like man, I kept having these flashbacks and thinking about it, and you know, I would I really felt like I did my best, and there's nothing I could have done differently. But there's still that. But again, like I'd have that what if thought, and I really never felt any like guilt about it. It's just like I just, to be honest, like my dad trusted God, and anytime I had a thought like how could a good God allow this to happen, I knew the answer was not that God was not good, because my dad believed that God was good. And so I really just had to trust and rest in that. That like, hey, every single one of us has a last day on this earth, and we don't know when that's going to be. And so I can just be grateful that I had a good dad for 19 years of my life. And so many people don't even know their dad, or they have a bad dad. And I just really quickly was able to get to a spot of gratitude, just like thank you God that I had a dad, that he wrote this letter, that, and so. Um,
That's really powerful. I mean, that you were able to go to that space and just know in your heart that you're going to use this for good, but you went to gratitude. It's hard to feel negative emotions and focus on the wrong things when we're in a state of gratitude, right? So that
well, yeah, I mean, I could have easily gone the opposite. There's some narratives or some stories that I could have told myself that really would not have served me well. I could have been really bitter at God. I could have been really bitter at my dad. Like, why did my dad let us go out that deep? Like, couldn't he have been more responsible than that? To be honest, I never went there, and I can even say those things now without actually really going there. Like and it doesn't really make sense to most people when I to understand that I started pretty soon after thanking God for my dad's death. Like what? Like how can you thank God for? Because like I would love to have my dad here today. Like I wouldn't trade any. Like I want my dad here. But there were so many good things that happened because of it, and so I just was able to just say, God, I trust you.
Um, I want to go back to what you just said because I think that is such a big stretch for anyone to go where you just said, like that you're thanking God, maybe not for this, but maybe for the good that has come out of it. But you made a decision to find it, and I'm curious the time frame from the time your dad passed to now you have, I don't know if you'd call it a calling or that was like maybe a purpose that you felt that you were always going to accomplish, something big. Like how did this come to and through you?
Yeah, so it was that happened in May. I got back to the University of Arkansas in August. I met a guy named Sean, and he worked for a student ministry there, and he started mentoring me. And pretty quickly, he started challenging me to help other people like grow in their faith and grow spiritually. And I was like really scared to do it. I didn't want to do it, but at the same time, I wanted to, and I wanted to like I knew how um, quickly um, things could change and our time on Earth could end. And so my sophomore year, I was living in the dorms, and I started mentoring and leading small groups and really trying to invest in other people. So for the next 3 years, I continued to live on campus to, to mentor a lot of the freshman guys coming in. And so I would say, pretty soon after my dad died, I just thought, man, I want to live for what really matters. I want to live for God, and I want to live for the souls of people. And so I didn't know how that was going to play out. And we didn't start this. If you had told, so we started this 3 years ago, the legacy letter mission to help a million dads and moms write at least one letter to their children. And if you had told me that, like when I was in college, you're going to be trying to lead kind of this national movement to help people, I would have said, heck no. Like it would have scared me, and like, hey, you're going to be on the Today Show and all that. Like, no way. Like, I'm not a speaker. I don't want to be up in front. And now I'm I've been able to step into that, like one step at a time. Like God doesn't show you too much down the road. I don't think you just gotta trust Him one step at a time.
Yeah, God always equips the called, right? So go back on that timeline though. Like, you went back to college, and then when did this? I remember you telling us on a phone call that you just came home one day from work, if I remember this right, and basically you had this epiphany, or you knew that there was a moment where you were going to have to commit to this and make a committed decision, like burn the boats, and I'm going full into this. I'm going to make this a business, this legacy letter. Tell us how much time elapsed from, like, how old were you when that happened?
That was 3 years ago. so my dad died 20 years ago. So 17 years afterwards. And at that point, my children were young, and I had written them a legacy letter. And so part of that is when they were younger, I'm sitting there like a young dad, like, man, what do I do here? I want to be a good dad. I've got my career, all this stuff going on. And like, what do I do? I know what I'll do. I'll write them a letter. If anyone knows if I have a letter from their dad, it's me. And so I pull out a blank sheet of paper, and looking at this thing, it was overwhelming. I'm like, what the heck am I about to write? And but I knew I had to finish it. And over the years, I've told my story, and the number one thing I get back from people is like, man, I wish I had a letter like that from my dad or mom. And then every once in a while, I meet someone like, ooh, I got a letter like that too. And it was like we were in a special club together that I got a letter from my dad club. And so I knew I wanted my children to be in that. And so I ended up doing a lot of research to really understand what I need to speak over my children, my conviction. Like, obviously I knew the impact of my dad's letter, but to really understand why. And so I wanted to make sure all the things that my children really need to hear from me are in this letter. And I really came to the conclusion that I believe the most powerful words spoken on the planet are spoken by a father and spoken by a mother. There's things that I could say to my children today that could absolutely wreck their life. Like, I shouldn't even accidentally say these things. And Bob, you could say these same things to my kids, and it might hurt their feelings a little bit, but they're going to be able to brush it off and get over it. But if I say it, like, they're going to need some counseling to get through it. On the flip side, there are things that I can say to my children that can bring them confidence, that can help them be more resilient, help them be more successful, bring hope into their life. And so I wanted to make sure all those things are in the letter. And so it was really through writing that letter. And then around that same time, two different guys a month apart shared with me, not knowing my story at all, how they'd received a life-changing letter from their dad. And so I'm sitting there like listening to this guy, and I'm like, what am I doing here with my life? I got to help more people get a letter from their dad. And so then ended up telling my wife, hey, this is what I'm called to do, like dropping everything. And she's looking at me like, so I was doing marketing I'd been doing campus ministry for 12 years. I got my accounting degree, then did campus ministry, and then I was doing marketing for a different company.
Okay, so you were established in this position. This was kind of the thing you'd been doing for a while. I'm just trying to get to the point. I'm trying to get to the point of, like, you just said, "Hey, I'm jumping here, right?" And
yeah, my wife's sitting there looking at me like
she had no idea what was coming.
Like you're gonna. I know your letter was important, but you're telling me that you're gonna help people write a letter, and you're gonna provide. She's looking at our three kids, like, provide for us by doing that.
Right. Yeah. You remember those days, huh? Yeah, I can relate to that. Like, we've had a couple of those early on.
But that's a big idea to go, I know what I'm supposed to do, and I have no idea how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then to see how God walks alongside you, and he really conspires to like bring it in the most easy and effortless way if we'll get out of our own way. But that was really a big ask of yourself and your family, and that took a lot of courage and belief.
Yeah, and it really did feel like it was from God. And so I just, to be honest, I saw the future. Like I saw this being completed. Like we're gonna write more than 1 million letters, and so but I didn't know exactly how to get there. I just knew it was gonna work because I felt God was in it. And so even in these moments where it was like felt really hard and felt like, oh my gosh, like we don't have any money coming. I just like it's gonna work out. Like there was 1 month. This is like maybe 6 months in. So we'd had some people sign up. I created an online course and people were signing up. I was doing some podcasts. And then like we didn't have any money left. And I felt like I was on my hands and knees in my office, like praying on the floor. And I had up to that point had not been a person who prayed for like very specific things. Like I was scared to do it. Like I'm gonna put God into a box and like, oh my gosh, like what if he doesn't do it? So I started praying that we would make $20,000 in the next 2 weeks. Well, up to that point, we had not made $20,000, especially in like a 2 week period. Like individuals were signing up like $150 there, $150 there.
So this was a big ask.
This was a huge ask, and I was wrestling. I was like, I did not want to pray it, and then finally I was like, okay, I'll pray it. Well, I ended up getting a call from a business. I had not partnered with business at this point. I ended up meeting with this business owner. And I tell him, hey, this is going to be I had a business coach who was helping me out with all this. And I said, hey, this is going to be a $10,000 pack. And I said, it's normally 25,000. We'll do it for 10. We kind of set it up that way. And he goes, you don't have to give me any discounts. I'll pay the 25. And then I'm like, oh my gosh. And then the next day there was a guy, someone did a $10,000 package, and then someone else did 5, and then another person did like a 2.5. So in the next 2 weeks, like the number that I thought was impossible, God doubled that with a little bit extra. We made 42 grand in like 2 weeks. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, and it was,
It's like God parted the Red Sea for you. It was like Moses, right? It's like, here you go. You're on the right track. That's awesome. Well, that had to. Okay, this is going to happen, right? I'm doing this, and people are responding to it. That's a huge response. I mean, somebody to
Well, it's confirmation.
yeah, confirmation.
Confirmation. I want.
yeah, so much. And we still had hard months after that. Like there were still months where we were like, I mean, money goes fast. So we still had months where we were still figuring it out because then they paid and then I had to go actually service that. And we were still figuring
You're investing
out.
too
So,
in the business, and
as you guys know, like it's a roller coaster.
I'm curious. How do you think you're a better father because you received the letter, but you've also written the letter yourself?
Yeah, writing that letter, I quickly realized like that whole writing a letter, I was doing it for my kids, but I was the one feeling the immediate impact of it because it forced me to really slow life down and think about what was most important, and then also what I wanted to be true of my family, like 10 or 20 years from now. Most people don't know what they really want, and they definitely don't write down what they really want. And so what I've noticed is the people who actually know what they want and write it down, they're the ones who usually get what they want.
We have found that that's like less than 3% of the population that can tell you what they want and that they've got it written down. So that is confirmation of what you just said. I guess what I was leading you to is I'm assuming that the letter is such a gift to the one that you're writing, but I would guess it's a gift to yourself also, the individual that is actually writing the letter.
Yeah, I mean, I felt there was a sense of confidence with creating something that that's so valuable to someone. I will say it helped me really know my children on a deeper level because I really to be able to affirm them in the way that I did in this letter, I had to really think about like who they are and what is true of them. Probably the number one thing that I get from older parents as I write this letter is like, man, I wish I'd done this sooner. I wish I'd done this when I was a younger parent, because it would have shaped how I parented my kids.
Right. Well, what I love about it, Blake, is like your dad. Maybe he wasn't as expressive, and wasn't as maybe affectionate as you would have hoped. And I kind of grew up in that environment too. But your dad was able to express all of that and put it on paper, and so it still had a big effect. And that's what I love about that idea. And I mean, it's very inspiring to me. I'm looking forward to doing this. Kelly and I are, and maybe going through your course. And I know a lot of our listeners will benefit from this too. But when you did that, I'm just curious, did you sit down with each one of your three kids and give them the letter? I mean, how do you do it? What do you tell people to do? Do you tell them, you give them the letter, they go out on their own, they come back, they talk about it, or what? How do you recommend people experience this once they have the letter and they're ready to give it to their kids?
Yeah, so I tell people it's your letter, so you can give it when you want, but I encourage you to do it as soon as possible. Like if your children are not currently in a situation, they got a situation around the corner, and they're going to be better off with these words than without them. And so, every relationship is so different. So I love getting the stories where some people give them on Christmas morning, or they give it at a time that they would give a gift. And we're like, you got them. Like one dad gave it on Valentine's Day to his 20-year-old daughter, and of course she loved it. She read it on her own, and then then she came back in the room and they were crying and they talked about it a little bit. He said it was actually, she sent him a message like a few months after that. And she said, Dad, you will never know how much that letter meant to me. It was just God himself was writing those words. Not only is our relationship better, but every single relationship I have is better because of your letter. And the backstory is that her boyfriend had just broken up with her. And so she was in a bad spot. And there was a lot of noise, a lot of am I good enough? Am I lovable? Like all that kind of stuff. And her dad just cut through all that noise and really connected with her heart and said exactly what she needed. But back to your question, I went ahead and read it to my daughter when she was 4. And normally each night I'm reading her like a book, and a princess book. And that night I said, Daddy's got something for you tonight. And I don't know, Bob, Kelly, are you guys criers?
Yes. Both of us.
Okay, well, I am too. And my daughter did not know that I was, but she figured it out because I could barely make it through this letter. And, of course, I'm what is she thinking right now? As I'm just, got tears running down. And I get to the end of the letter and I look at her, and she looks right back at me. And she says, Daddy, can you read me the princess book now?
That's really cool, but
I read her the princess book, but the next night she did go with my wife, and she said, last night Daddy read me a message. Can he read me that message again tonight? So she didn't understand everything that was in that letter, but she got the main one. She got a daddy.
Well, she'll be pulling that out throughout her life, though. Different times and.
Because I'm sure with your letter, you shared a beautiful ending, and I'm sure there was wonderful things within that letter also. But was that the one sentence that maybe resonated with you and has carried you through so much of your life, or were there multiple things? Or
my dad's last line of his letter that you're talking about. Yeah, that was the line that I definitely repeated the most. And now as I'm helping people write a letter, I call it the legacy line. And so everyone's going to have a last line in the letter. And so.
And what was that? Can you repeat that again? Like
yeah, I said, as you're being faithful to the Bible, you're often going to find yourself in the minority. But I assure you that in heaven, you'll be in the majority of your own dad. And so if there's one line that you want to be repeated over and over again in your children's mind, like, what would it be? And so it's really cool to see parents come up with these lines. And so sometimes it's lines they've already said, like things they already say. Like your kids read that, like, oh yeah, Dad always says this. So sometimes it's something like that or something else in the letter. But
so I know that. Oh, go ahead. Please finish.
Well, I was going to say there's other things in the letter that my dad. one of the things my dad talked a lot about was just being faithful, like just being a faithful person, being faithful to your responsibilities. And so I've tried to live that out. And it's not always easy to be faithful to responsibilities, but I've learned that there's joy on the other side of being faithful to your responsibilities. And so there's a lot of things like that in my dad's letter that I've continued to try to live out.
Well, like Robert has said, we're excited to go through this, but I'm sure, are there like certain concepts that you have in regards to this letter?
Yep. So there's a couple lessons to really prepare your heart and mind to write this letter. And so we'll look forward, like your hope, your mission and vision for your family. We'll look back, and so we'll look at the relationship that you had with your dad and mom. And there's an exercise that'll be therapeutic. It'll help you think through what you want to say to your children. We do have a lesson on forgiveness. And I just tell people, you're about to write this pretty amazing letter to your children, and you don't want any unforgiveness in your life. Unforgiveness is like cancer, and I would never go find anyone in downtown Tulsa where I live and question people and say, hey, um, is unforgiveness, is that a good thing? Like, should I get some more of that in my life? And not one person would say, yeah, you should get some unforgiveness in your life. And yet, people walk around with unforgiveness all the time. And so we have an exercise to help people forgive. It's like, we got to get that cancer out of our life, but especially before we go to write this letter. And some people, they have unforgiveness towards their children, that they need to forgive their children. Sometimes it's their parent, sometimes it's a friend, or a lot of times it's themselves. Like, you got to forgive yourself. And
I
so that's part of the program.
Have you found personally, or have you heard, obviously after you experience a loss, you can for a while hear their voice, and then that kind of begins to fade. Do you think the words that are written on this letter is an opportunity for us to continually hear their voice? I guess I don't know if you understand what I'm asking.
Well, and Al Roker talked about that on the Today Show. He's like, man, I wish I had a letter so I could still hear my father's voice. And so, it's been 20 years. The memories definitely start to fade a little bit. I have some, those core memories. Um, but the beautiful thing about a letter is, like, you go back and read those words, and you can see it. Like, he wrote those words down. Like, there's no confusion. There's no like, okay, what did he really mean, or what did he say? I kind of forgot. It's like, no, he wrote it down. Like you can't change those words that are written down. Your memory can fade, but when you have something physical like that, it can't.
Yeah, and Blake, you mentioned unforgiveness is like a cancer, and obviously this is what we're talking about on this show 99% of the time, are people that are dealing with life events and tragedies and things they've had to endure, and how they were able to find forgiveness, or still looking to find forgiveness and need help. But this process that you take people through, is this a 3-step process, or is this 5 steps, or do you just explain to people that they can't go on with hatred and anger and resentment, and they just need to let it go? Or how do you counsel people in that area? I'm just curious.
Well, I do tell people that I'm not a professional counselor, and so I let them know that. But there is an initial step, I think, to forgiving, but it's ongoing. I talk to people a lot. It's like, man, I've forgiven my dad, and I need to forgive him again. And then next month, I need to forgive him again. And so it can, for some people, be a continual process of forgiveness. But I think a lot of people, especially as they try to parent their children, or with all the relationships, if you have that, and you guys know this better than, if you have that unforgiveness in your life, like, it really does just affect every relationship you have. You may not even know it, how it's affecting you, and so it's worth it to work through it. I just told a group of people like an hour ago, I said, hey, this is not easy. This is hard, but this is what we do. Like we do is a group of dads. And I said, guys, this is what we do. We do hard stuff because when we do hard stuff, we get better. When we get better, there's a lot of people that benefit from us getting better. Our spouses, our kids, the people we work with, our neighbors, people at church. And so we got to do the hard stuff to get better.
I want to go back to say that we have someone in the audience and they're somewhat challenging you. Maybe even saying, how dare you to say that I'm supposed to thank God for what happened in my life? I'm not in a space that I could do that. I could never do that. What would you say to that person?
I totally get that, and I understand how you would not be able to say that. I'd say it's possible. You can get there, and other people have gotten there. But what you're experiencing right now, there's a lot of people that have been in your shoes. You're not alone. And so taking those necessary steps to get there, because once you get there, your life will be so much better and you'll be so much more free. And so let's do the work to get there. But it's going to be hard. I understand.
I love how you say that with a smile on your face, buddy. That's true.
Yeah. Well, you guys are smiling at me, and I think the biggest thing that people want to be understood, and so I am not in a position to say, hey, you should feel this way or you should be like that. It's like, man, no, I understand. Like it's hard, and I mean, I'm talking to parents all the time who have a lot of pain or haven't talked to their kids in 20 years, and you know, I don't want anyone to feel shame over things that they regret doing. Like, we're not trying to make anyone feel more shame through this process. It's like, yeah, that's in the past, so let's work forward. There's hope for the future, and so let's work towards that.
It's difficult at times, and it can be very challenging. Like Carolyn in the ravine, it was a very difficult and long process. You want to talk about that for a minute, honey?
Well, one of the things that I've been really inspired since I've been listening to you is just your, I don't know if it was a gift or it was a choice or is it your ability not to experience the guilt. Because I think so many, and including myself, had so much guilt around the loss in my grief process. And that was really a block, and I was struggling and I was stuck because I could not let that go. It was the guilt of how I could have done something different and then the events would have changed. But it did take me a while, but getting to that space of accepting this is what it is and I can't change it, but I certainly can find good. And like you said, it's not always easy. It's sometimes really hard to find the good, but it is there. So I know that may not be what you were asking me, but it leads me into one of my next questions with you. You did find the good and you found it in a really big way. And I guess, is this your purpose? Like, your purpose is to reach the million and beyond. That is your purpose with these letters, correct?
Yeah, and let me say it. I do recognize that my experience was around this tragedy, and the guilt and not feeling guilt is abnormal. Like, I think your experience with your situation is probably more normal, but I think I could, and so I think again it goes back to my dad's letter, and my dad provided that for me, and my dad was there for me in my darkest moments, and so maybe that's why I'm so passionate. One reason I'm so passionate about this, because I do think we can help our children, knowing when those tragedies happen, to get through them. And I think everyone's grieving process is different, and so I'm not saying anyone should experience it the way I should experience it. But as far as our mission, our mission, million dads and moms and beyond, and it's this letter, but it's so much more than the letter. My my hope and my dream is for strong families in our country and in our world. And so I think that everyone, when they write this letter, it's going to lead to stronger families. And I think when we have stronger families, we have a better world. And so, the letter, when everyone writes the letter, like even if no one ever received it, like there's only people just writing the letter, like the people writing would be better and we'd live in a better world. But not only do you have someone writing, it's someone receiving it. And you have someone receiving it, and you're receiving words that we all need we need to feel loved unconditionally. And we're better when we are. We're better when we're affirmed. And especially our parents are proud of us. And when somebody believes in us, I tell parents, I was like, hey, it can be really hard to believe in your children when they're making a lot of mistakes, and believe that they're going to make it. But we're never going to shame our children into who they can be. Now, they might make it to who they have the potential to be, but it won't be because of us. It'll be because somebody else came into their life and they believed in them. And so there's so much power in believing in yourself and believing in other people. It's such a gift to give that to someone. But it really should be us as parents, like believing in our children.
Right. Well, the likelihood that then your kids and the kids that have received these letters, that they're going to do something similar, the probability is very high. So this is going to be a generational thing that you're setting in motion. Yeah. Right. Oh yeah. It's the impact is going to go far and wide. And so Blake, you're 3 years into this. I know now you're bringing this to cities and I want you to talk about Kansas City. We're here in one of the suburbs in Kansas City. And then also, where are you on your target of 1 million? Like, where are you and bring us up to speed on all that?
Yeah, so we've helped parents write, I don't know the exact number, but thousands to tens of thousands. We have a long ways to go, but at the same time, I think if God willed it, we could be at 1 million, 12 months from now. I would say we're honest, to be quite honest, like ahead of where I thought we would be at 3 years in. And being on the Today Show for sure helped that. I didn't anticipate that happening at all. That kind of came out of the blue. And then from that, we've started to launch cities, with Kansas City being the first city, with this idea that when a person writes a letter, it's life-changing. It's it's life-changing for a person to receive this letter, but what happens when the whole city does it? And so there are some business leaders that have come together in Kansas City that said, hey, yeah, let's do this. Let's create this movement. And so, when I started this, I had no idea that businesses would be providing this to their employees, and it become this value add. And so now we're bringing together these business leaders who are providing our program to their employees and to their clients. And I think in year one, we have a goal and a clear path to get there of having 10,000 letters in year one in Kansas City. Hellsberg Diamonds just signed on last week to be a sponsor. And so we're launching Phoenix in a couple weeks. And then our goal is to be in 10 cities in the next 12 months. And so we've got some cities we're working on right now that we haven't announced yet of where we're going to launch next.
That's really cool. Very exciting. Congrats. Well, let's just go to tell our listeners, Blake, where can they find more about the Legacy Letter Challenge and workshops or events that you're having? Where do they go? And then also, if they want to sign up, if they're here in Kansas City and they want to attend or get involved in the Kansas City Challenge, how would they do that?
Yeah, if you go to legacyletter.com and then you click on Kansas City, it'll take you to all that going on. There's several events coming up. Some of them are private events, and then we'll have some more public events that are happening. So legacyletter.com. We were legacyletterchallenge.com, and then we just purchased legacyletter.com, which is kind of exciting for us to have the shorter domain and a little more official, I guess.
It's very exciting. Okay, so legacyletter.com. And do you have workshops that you offer, or online courses, or what's available there?
So we do have the free guide, and it has the outline of the letter. So you can go download that. And then we do have the online kind of the self-guided masterclass. And so anyone can sign up for that at any point and start writing your legacy letter. You start today.
Everyone should be doing it. Kelly and I included. We're going to do it for sure.
Well, I just want to affirm just the power of this and the importance and how meaningful these are, because I can go back to when my friend passed and we were in the home cleaning things out, and there was a notebook that was found, and it was a letter started to me, but it wasn't finished. And you talk about, the hope, like then it was like hopelessness that like, you're looking for answers or closures to things, and, it wasn't finished. And I would have given anything to had that letter be finished so I could have, read the thoughts and the words and had that, like you said. I remember earlier in the conversation, you said your life could have taken a different turn and you could have ran to different things, but it sounded like you ran to this letter and the contents in that letter. So I just commend you and affirm it. And I'm, really excited to do this ourselves for our boys, because I do believe, you change generations through thoughts and words and the way that we think. But it's interesting. I'm going to share one more thing. I remember I have a wonderful dad, amazing dad, but he's not one that can really, share some of those more intimate personal thoughts. And I remember I knew I felt loved, but he had really not ever said it to me. And I remember being in his house with him, and I looked him in the eyes and I said, "You are going to say those words to me." And I remember it being so uncomfortable for him, but he did. But I'm just thinking what else he would have shared if he would have had the opportunity just to put his own thoughts in that letter. So I'm going to encourage him to do one also for his children, which is beautiful. But one of the things that we always ask, and we kind of close with, is if you could describe what forgiveness looks like, feels like, sounds like, tastes like in your life, like, how would you describe that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, it's getting to a spot where I am not hanging on to something that I'm mad or angry about, and able to just completely let go and be free. Where that anger that I have or that situation just doesn't have any control over me. And that the person that I forgive, I'm able to like genuinely like love them and want the best for them and hope the best for them. Doesn't mean, when you forgive someone, doesn't mean that the relationship is going to be what it once was, or that you have to be best friends or be close. You can still have boundaries around the relationship, but for me, genuinely want the best for that person.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that.
All right. Well, Blake, this was very inspiring. Thanks for coming on the show, and I'm really excited to see where you take this, where it's going to go. I know it's going to far exceed anything that you imagine. I just think back 3 years. Look at how far you've come in 3 years. Tony Robbins has a great quote. He says, people overestimate what they can do in a year, and they underestimate what they can do in 5 years. And I know you're on track to do really cool things. And so we wish you the best. And again, one more time for our listeners, Blake, where they can find you on the internet.
You can go to legacyletter.com. And I appreciate you guys having me on here and just helping get the word out about this and just for your partnership. So appreciate it a lot.
Absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, you can find Time for Forgiveness, a website, timeforforgiveness.org, and also under the same name on Instagram and Facebook. So thanks, everyone, for being with us today. Thank you again, Blake Brewer. Keep rocking on with Legacy Letter Challenge, and everybody out there, get inspired and get one of these letters done for your kids. Thanks so much.